Welcome to City of Keene in Focus. Thanks so much for listening. Hello, and welcome to our next episode of City of Keene in Focus. My name is Asa Kramer, and I am joined this morning by Elizabeth Furland, our city manager, and Dan Langell, our city assessor. Hi, you two.
Good morning, Asa.
Good morning.
How's everyone doing this morning?
Good. So I'm really glad that Dan was able to join us this morning, back from a wonderful vacation.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, because at the last city council meeting, they approved our contract for the revaluation work that we're having done. And so
Excellent.
It's a big project.
It is.
Yeah, and you're leading the charge. So would you mind just talking a little bit about, in New Hampshire, the requirements set by DRA and the process that we go through?
Yeah. So every community has to, what they call value anew every 5 years. So we have to bring the entire city, all of its property up to its market value. The last time we did this was in 2021, and so 2026 is the time we're going to do it again. It's important for a couple reasons. We don't bring in any more tax dollars, we don't bring in any more money as a result of this, but we want to make sure that there's equity amongst the taxpayers, and that's the biggest reason why we do this. Because our values are set at a certain date, the market continues to change after that. The market's always fluctuating, increasing, decreasing, so we have to account for all those changes. Right now, when you look at property, especially the residential property, they're at about 60% of market value.
You know what's so interesting about that is you can tell, because if you look at what houses are selling for right now versus what your house is assessed at, our assessments are well below the price of housing in our community right now. And so, it makes sense to do this, but it is confusing to people because they think that, well, we're just doing this to get more money from them. But in reality, we get the same amount of money. It's all about how we collect it in the community and the breakdown between residential and commercial property. And unfortunately, the commercial property, the values aren't growing at the same rate as residential.
No. So we're seeing like some of your larger commercial properties that include housing, your larger apartment complexes. Apartments continue to be very low vacancy rates, very high rental rates. So those types of commercial properties will see a pretty big increase along with
Makes
everybody
sense,
else.
yeah.
But yeah, your manufacturing, your retail, your restaurants, it's just not appreciating the same way residential houses. And we know housing is not just an issue unique to Keene. That's statewide, if not nationwide.
Everywhere. Yeah, everywhere. What happens is, we adjust our value, we bring everything up to as close to a market rate as possible. That ends up dropping the rate. So the overall tax rate will drop.
Correct.
Because our value has increased. We collect the same amount of money, but depending upon what happens to your value, whether you own a home in the community or you own a business, that calculation will tell you whether or not your tax bill increases or not. And because the residential properties, their values are increasing at a much greater rate than commercial, we'll see a bit of a shift.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate side of, the way the law works. We're seeing a lot of pressure on the lower valued homes specifically. Your manufactured homes, your condominiums, the homes that are currently assessed for under $200,000.
Yeah.
They're going to see a very large increase.
Yeah.
And that's just because of demand. Everyone is overpaying, or there's so much demand for that type of housing.
Yeah, and it just makes it harder because those are the more affordable properties for people. There's a higher demand because the other properties have increased so much that they're no longer affordable. So now even the affordable properties are going to feel the pinch. I think that's the challenge. That's what I worry about. A mobile home, for instance. I remember when you could get a mobile home in a park and it was very affordable, and people would use that as an opportunity. Maybe they would buy a mobile home and then they would maybe later move into a single family, or maybe they would downsize into a mobile home from their house. But even now, that's becoming harder and harder for people to do.
Yeah, we're going to do some other things to try to mitigate the pressure on those types of homes, especially for those on fixed income, the elderly population. We're going to be taking a good look at all of our exemptions and credits just to make sure that those are also increasing the way the market's increasing. So we'll bring that before the City Council in early to midwinter and look at both the exemption amounts and the eligibility to help offset some of that increase.
Yeah, that makes sense because if the values are changing, the limits also need to adjust to make sure that at least the individuals who are receiving these credits right now or exemptions are still eligible for them later when these values change. That's going to be a tough year.
Yeah, it's a lot of work that goes into it. Obviously, we ask for the patience of the public, for city council, for staff, because there's a lot of steps involved, and everyone wants to know that final answer, but we have to do a lot of work to get there first.
You and your staff do a great job. You also do a great job with outreach. The last revaluation process, I think, went rather smoothly. I mean, it's a complicated process. There's a lot of work involved in making sure all of the properties are updated, and then there's an opportunity for people to come in if they don't agree with their value. Maybe they tore down a shed, but a shed is still showing on their property tax card. So there's a long process. In the end, we have a good product to be able to move forward with the city, but that will require a lot of outreach.
We do offer all of our records online for transparency, and we ask everyone to review those now. And if there's questions, bring them to us so we can make sure that our data is correct going into this. And our department is currently going out to all the properties now, asking to view interior, exterior of the properties, review all the sales.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because
Sure.
I think, we do our best to be able to get into all of the properties and make sure that we have accurate information on that tax card, because that's what's driving the value. That's what you're basing the value on. But sometimes people don't let us in.
No, they don't. And we keep records on every property now, and we're always trying to update that. And things change over time, things depreciate, changes are made for whatever reason. So we just want to make sure that the information is accurate, because it doesn't just affect your property, it affects how we're valuing every other property, because we're valuing on a mass scale. We know it can be inconvenient, a little intrusive, but if we don't get into these properties, we have to estimate.
Right.
And I would rather use good, accurate information, and it is what it is,
Right.
versus trying to estimate what possibly is inside a home.
Right.
I mean, I've been doing this long enough, 20 plus years, that I can look at the outside of the house and get a pretty good sense for what's in there. But I'd much rather go through it and actually get the accurate
Have accurate information on the card. So can you talk a little bit about the timeline and when does this actually get implemented in terms of the tax rate?
Sure, yeah. Timeline is, we're going to be starting working on it in the fall. We're going to give the taxpayers their preliminary value notice probably mid to late summer. That's really the first time that they actually get to see what the product is, what the end result is. And at that time, they can come in for a hearing or more of a public meeting just to discuss their value, discuss how we came up with the values that we did. And from that point, then we finalize the values, which will probably take place September, October of next year. And then that determines the final tax bill. The worst thing that anybody can do is to take their new value and multiply it by the current tax rate. As you mentioned, our tax rate will be dropping probably pretty significantly. Obviously, that depends a lot on budget decisions going forward next year as well.
What if we didn't want to do this? What if we said, no, we're not going to do this because we know this is going to be a hardship for residential properties because the values have changed so dramatically? Do we have that choice?
We don't. A couple of things. One, it is a state law that we're required to do this every 5 years. The Department of Revenue oversees that, and they can force a community to do that. When they force a community to do that, at that point, the community is removed from the process of determining who the contractor may be, how the process rolls out. They actually hire someone and then force the community to pay for it. It becomes much more of an expensive, involved process.
Well, I think that does a good job explaining the process, and it's a process for the state of New Hampshire, and all of our communities are going through this, but they're not going through it at the same time. And that also creates some confusion because people like to compare tax rates across communities in New Hampshire, but unfortunately, if they haven't done their revaluation in the same year, you're not really comparing apples to apples. So I think it would be good to have you back again, maybe kind of talk about once the project gets going, talk about how it's going, what the next steps are for residents, when they'll be seeing people visiting their homes, all of that.
Yeah, we know it's a difficult process for everybody. We want everyone to be as comfortable as they can and have as much knowledge as they can about the process. So.
One more thing before I let you go. Sometimes I get questions about how do I know that this is legitimate, that the person coming to my house is actually from the city or working for the city?
Yeah, great question. We take the public safety very seriously, as well as our own staff. So we send out letters prior notifying them that we're going to be in the area, that we're going to look to be on their property specifically. They can call for an appointment, or if they have any questions prior to us. The employees will be driving a city vehicle with the city seal or emblem on them. We have ID. Anyone who has questions, we will show the identification. Anyone who's hesitant, seriously, to stop, say no, give us a call, make sure it's legitimate, and then they can let that person in.
I've had some people talk to me about this who maybe they have young teenagers at home and they come to the house. You don't have to let people in. If you're uncomfortable, like Dan said, you can give us a call and we can set up an appointment for you to come back to the property when you're there.
Yeah, and we won't go into a home if it's just kids are home. We want to make sure that ideally it's the property owner, or at least someone over the age of 18.
All right, well, that's great. Thank you so much, Dan. That was a lot of really good information to share.
Thank you.
And happy to have you back from vacation.
Thanks.
All right, so we had a council meeting last Thursday.
We did. It was a big one.
Yeah, it was a late night that night. We had multiple public hearings, and then, we had some good conversation. I think one of the things that has gotten a lot of attention, rightfully so, is what's the right response to the petition from Keene Pride in terms of the city and how to actually make a public statement of support and what that looks like. And so that was one of the things that they talked about at this council meeting, and ultimately council voted to have the mayor draft a proclamation. And so we'll see that coming forward. I did get some questions from the reporter the next day from the Sentinel. Sophia, she does a great job. She followed up and she's like, what's the definition of a proclamation versus a declaration? And when do you use those? The mayor can draft a proclamation at any time, and typically it's not a proclamation that's been directed by the city council. It's something that, he does for a variety of reasons. A declaration, and I don't know that it's actually defined anywhere. I couldn't find anywhere where it was listed as a definition of a proclamation versus a declaration. But typically with a declaration, we're declaring something. So like declaring a state of emergency. We did use a declaration during COVID. What that typically does is it triggers other things in either their charter or in the city ordinances. Like for COVID, it triggered some additional flexibilities for management of the day-to-day operations of the city while we were addressing that emergency. So that's typically when a declaration is used, but in the past, the city council has used a declaration for a policy statement, something that they felt strongly about that they wanted to take a stand on instead of just having the mayor draft something. And so they've used a declaration in the past. But honestly, I don't know if that's written anywhere. I mean, that's just what we've done and how it's been handled in the past. And so the mayor will be drafting a proclamation. And really what the mayor was looking for was some language to be able to use when he goes to different events. And so this proclamation that he's drafting, he's planning to use at the next Keene Pride event downtown. And so I think he's gotten a lot of really good feedback, both from our Human Rights Commission and from the City Council and from members of the public. There's been a lot of feedback on this. And so he'll use all of that feedback to draft this next proclamation.
And I believe Keene Pride, they generally hold their annual event sort of end of September. So I think we'll be looking forward for that around the same time this year. So
I do think it will be back in September, and it's grown every year. So
I know.
It's been really successful, which is awesome to see.
Really cool, yeah.
And speaking of events downtown, we've got one coming up this weekend.
We do.
Yeah.
We've got
one of my favorites is the
Music Fest, right?
Lots of music all through downtown all day long.
It. Yeah.
And I love that it's free. I think all of our events are free, but it brings people into the downtown to enjoy the music and to visit our local restaurants. It's just a really fun day. But we also have art in the park that day, so you get the artistic value of music and actual art.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
What a fun, creative day.
Yeah, it's really a great day. And so also on the city council meeting, lots of items were referred to committee, but we have so many items that were referred to the Municipal Services, Facilities, and Infrastructure Committee, so MSFI, for this week that we had to break apart the agenda. Otherwise, we would have been there for a really long time, and I don't think anybody does well after several hours of a meeting. Everybody sort of, it's hard to focus, and it's hard to sit through that long of a meeting when you're waiting in the audience to be able to speak to your agenda item. And so the chair, Councilor Greenwald, asked that we look at breaking those agenda items into 2 meetings. And so there will be one actually tonight, and then there will be one on September 3rd for the remaining items that we aren't able to deal with this evening. Even so, we have a large agenda tonight. We are going to be talking about the access to the wastewater treatment plant driveway. And I'm using that word very carefully because there's been a lot of conversation about this, people getting it confused with Airport Road or using the term interchangeably. Airport Road leads all the way up past the airport to the access road to the wastewater treatment plant. And from that point, it's actually the driveway to the wastewater treatment plant. It is not a public road. It is not a road that's controlled by the town of Swansea. It's really just the access road to the wastewater treatment plant. So there's been concerns related to safety, and we talked a little bit about that last time, and the concerns related to people who are walking their dogs or just walking, taking pictures, parking alongside the driveway to take pictures. We've had some concerns from some pretty large septage haulers. We've even had some conflicts with plowing, people not moving out of the way when we're trying to plow.
Yeah.
So tonight, Aaron Costa will start the conversation with a quick overview of why they made the decision to restrict access during operational hours, and it is strictly a safety decision. And I know that there have been several letters to the city council, and again, some confusion because some members of the public thought that the council would have had to approve and discuss changing this, but it really doesn't require that because it is just the driveway, the access to the wastewater treatment plant, and not an actual road. But there'll be lots of conversation about that. And then tonight we are also going to hear about the work that's been done on the downtown West Side parking garage studies. We hired a consultant to look at the demand for parking. We hear about parking all the time, and there's this perception that we need more of it. But do we really? We're going to find out.
Stay tuned
That's
for
right,
tonight.
stay tuned. I know what the answer is, but I'll wait for the conversation. This study looked at different times of day. It looked at if we were to build a parking garage, how would that be financed? What sort of model might be used? Where might it be located? Spoiler alert, on Gilboa Ave is really where we've looked. And also looking to the future. And I think this is important because any project of this magnitude that gets included in the capital plan and eventually becomes part of the operating budget, it's planned out way in advance, at least 7 to 10 years. And so we're not talking just about today. Do we need a garage today? We're talking about the future. And if the decision is that, yes, we need to start planning for that, then we start setting aside money for that so that when this project does need to happen, we have some funds that is set aside to be able to afford to build the parking garage. And so we're going to talk about that tonight as well. But really, I think the majority of the meeting will be on the downtown infrastructure project. Don Lucier, our Public Works Director, will be providing his monthly update. And included in that update is the update for costs. Stantec has been putting together the bid documents. So once the council made a decision on their design elements, Stantec was able to go through all of those design elements and put together a bid document. And we're pretty close to going out to bid in the next month or two. And tonight we're going to hear about the increase in costs. The cost of the downtown project has dramatically increased over the years, and I don't see it getting any cheaper anytime soon. And so tonight, the Public Works Director will talk about some options for modifications to the project to bring down that cost sum and how we might be able to finance it over the next few years.
Yeah, I think that's just part of the reality of the world and time that we're living in, is that, especially with construction materials and labor, the price just keeps going up and up and up. So.
Yeah, and we don't know really what's going to happen with tariffs and how that will influence some of the products that you need to have for projects like these. And so it is definitely a challenging time to move projects forward. But we've seen when we don't invest in our infrastructure, when we don't replace our pipes under the ground, what can happen. And what happens is really disruptive, not only to residential properties, but to businesses as well. I mean, we saw with the water break that recently happened on Water Street, the impact it had to all of our coffee shops. Some of them shut down for a day or two. We saw what happened, with some of our restaurants. They had to get creative and really scramble to be able to keep open. And that's really tough for a business. And especially, a small business, it's hard to absorb that dramatic unplanned change to your revenues. When you're closed for a day, you didn't plan. So we want to try to avoid that. And the best way to do that is to really systematically invest in infrastructure and be as proactive as possible. Finance also has a hefty topic on the agenda as well this week. So Finance, which is Thursday evening at 6 p.m., Councillor Favelis has put forward a letter to the council to place the Keno question on the ballot. So the question of whether or not to have Keno within the city borders has been on the ballot a couple times, and it's been voted down each time by the voters. Now the law has changed to say that you have to opt out. So before you had to opt in. So before a community had to vote to allow Keno within their borders, now, because of the recent law change, you have to opt out of it. And so it's an extra step that communities have to take. In order to do that, we have to meet a deadline to be able to place a question on this upcoming ballot. And so we have enough time. The letter was placed on more time until the law was actually approved. And now Councilor Favelis will talk to the committee about whether or not to place that question on the ballot.
That's a good clarification to make, because I could see that causing a lot of confusion if it's always sort of been worded one way.
So this will be the third time, assuming they approve putting it on the ballot. It'll be the third time the voters are asked this question, whether or not you want Keno to be in businesses in the city of Keene. And then the big project for the night will be a conversation about a solar project at the airport. This is a project we've been working on for a couple of years. We're at the point now where the council needs to make a decision on whether or not they want to own the solar project or they want to just buy power through a power purchase agreement. In the past, we've purchased power. So we have a solar project on the roof on Marlborough Street for Public Works Department and the Police Department. We have a solar project there. We purchase power through this agreement. We have another one up at the airport property near a wastewater treatment plant that powers the treatment plant, and we purchase power. The reason why we are looking at potentially owning this one is because two reasons. One, it's much larger. It's a 5 megawatt. The larger the project, the more savings you could potentially gain. But also, there's this 30% tax credit that the federal government has had in place. So in the past, investors are getting that 30% tax credit. So when local investors would invest in a solar project, they'd get the tax credit for the first 6 years, and then they would sell off the project to municipalities, or the municipality would just continue to buy the power at the agreed upon rate. So the investor got that benefit, and we're looking at potentially getting that benefit for the city. So it could be a huge savings. It could be a savings of over $3 million.
Whoa, that's huge.
That's just on the purchase price. And then once you've built the project, the savings over the life of the project is also multi-million-dollar savings. So the risk, though, so there's always there's risk reward, right? So if you own the project, you have to plan for eventual replacement of the inverters. So that would be a capital cost midway through the life of the project, which we're estimating between 20 to 25 years that this solar project would be in place. You also have to maintain it. So there's an operations and maintenance cost, which is not a huge cost, but it's an annual cost. You have to have a contractor that's keeping these inverters running and making sure everything is operational. And then there's the weather. So making sure that these are productive, especially when the sun is out. It's less of a concern in the winter, and we're still producing energy in the winter, but in the summer we're producing a lot of energy, and so this energy is going into the grid through net metering, and so there's some effort and some risk involved in that, but there's a lot more reward in terms of cost savings for the city in the future and potentially for the school district. So we would be producing enough energy with this project to power all of the municipal accounts and have excess to offer to the school district.
Wow.
So it's a huge project. It's going to be a big decision for the city council. And so we'll be starting that conversation tomorrow night. But I do not anticipate that the FOP will be ready for a recommendation until the following FOP meeting. And so I'm planning on Revision, which is our contractor, doing an initial presentation on just sort of the history of the project, where we are right now, what they're estimating for cost savings, and then coming back, because I've had a third party also take a look at this project to do an analysis, and their numbers are much more conservative. We're probably going to be somewhere in the middle, but I want to make sure that we've looked at this from all angles so that we can give the city council good information for them to be able to make good decisions.
All right. Well, it sounds like there's a lot happening for these upcoming committee meetings and a lot of good discussions that they're going to get into.
Yeah. And then, really, these projects are looking ahead for the future in our capital planning process, which is kicking off, and we'll be talking capital projects for the next few months as well.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about today?
I think that's enough for today.
I know, we really covered a lot. Yeah.
Well, and not only was it a lot, it's just those are bigger projects, and there's a lot of moving pieces, both with solar and how you purchase and build, how people invest in them, and then what type of savings you can achieve. And then also in the revaluation, which those are complex decisions. I think the revaluation is a little less complex because we don't have a lot of decision in it, right? So when you're looking at your revaluation, it's really just about the data, and you're just making adjustments based on that data. But when you're making decisions like how to build and how to own or operate or how to purchase power, those are complex.
Yeah, definitely. I want to encourage everyone to go to keenanh.gov/jobs. There's a lot of awesome job opportunities. There are some opportunities at our Parks and Rec department, which seem like really fun, rewarding jobs, some programming specialists. Check those out. And as Elizabeth mentioned, this weekend is Music Fest and Art in the Park. We've got some really awesome community events coming up, including Keene Pride at the end of the month. And I think we will wrap up for today, and we will see you next time. Thanks for listening to City of Keene in Focus. We'll see you next time.